But the most important thing that you see here is India's first notified slum area and also a heritage area. And if you look northeast, this is what you'll see. That's Red Fort there. There's a shadow of the colonial past. That's the 1850s, 7 onwards. These were actually built, I guess, in the 1880s, which are now heritage British structures that are there. The vision of the world-class future, that's the metro and the metro IT park in the background. But the interesting thing that we miss in this picture, which is what I'm going to be dealing with here, is a place that you don't see. Because it's below the level of those 3 different narratives, it's in the riverbed. It's a place called Pushta. This is Yamuna Pushta, 2003, okay, an informal settlement, the kind of thing that we want to try and promote and develop. And you can see it as it was. But in Feb to May 2004, under a series of different engagements, Pushta was demolished. This is what it looked like in 2004, and this is what it looks like today. Fine, it's been completely erased, obliterated from the map. Many of these evictions are entirely legal. They're supported by the legal system. They're in some cases sanctified by the Supreme Court. This is a plot that looks at urbanization and Gini coefficient in 4 different locations over maybe a 20, 25, 30-year period. The interesting question there, so you have India there. There's a plot that starts in 1973 and goes to 2005. You have China, you have South Africa just after the transition, and of course you have Brazil with the, the sort of the Lula effect, so to speak, towards the end of that process, where you actually see the Gini coming down. So this looks at inequality and urbanization, and you can see the trend. Would we want to take the Chinese trajectory, which seems to be fairly on the sort of the standard Kuznets kind of situation, where you would actually have inequality rising, and then you expect it at some point of time to flatten out? Would you actually go the Brazilian way? And of course, there are big questions about the sustainability of that. Or, God forbid, would you actually land in the South African situation, which even post-transition is actually becoming significantly worse. So what's the big opportunity around the urban? The big opportunity is that there's a lot of spaces that are opening up at the same time. There's a lot of unfreezing happening. There are at least 7, 8, 9 different transitions that are happening simultaneously in this rural to urban transition. And it is the creation of these spaces that gives the niches to people who especially are poor and vulnerable to try and grab space inside it. The fundamental challenge that we have at the macro level is that the Indian economy, the structure is changing, and urbanization is a core driver of this structural change. The red line that you see at the top is basically people employed in the primary sector. The big challenge that we have is we have to try and address the large number of people who are in the primary sector with the green line that's going down, which is now close to 15%, this is 2004 data, which is the output from that sector. So there's a huge gap there. This is the fundamental structural challenge that we have of trying to move people from farm to non-farm and from non-farm to manufacturing and other sector employment. And this lag is sort of going to play itself out over the next, and simultaneously, and Rakesh spoke to this very briefly, is the manufacturing sector has actually seen, as you can see here, the 2 lines at the bottom have been relatively flat now for a really long time. So being able to push up manufacturing sector employment so that we have some alternatives to large scale under and unemployment in the primary sectors, and this informal sector pool, which is sort of assumed to be able to absorb everybody else who can't find work. The interesting thing that we've seen in the last 20 years or so is that the urban-rural differential per capita income is increasing. In fact, at the moment, it's about 3.5 times. Okay, so that urban-rural differential is increasing, and one of the things that scholars have had real trouble trying to explain is why our migration rates have not actually picked up. So South Asia is actually quite particular in this case, and then there's a whole debate and the whole range of questions around this. But fundamentally, in spite of that differential increasing, our migration rates have not picked up. There has been reducing urban poverty. What you see here, especially if you look at the right tail of that curve, is that the reducing urban poverty, as you move the poverty line, there's the vertical line there is that as the curve builds out towards the right, there's increasing inequality with the reducing poverty. And the big question, of course, like we said earlier, is are there socioeconomic and political limits to that? There are very clearly urban winners and losers. The extremely poor, and you can see the slope of the line on both sides. I'll run through this really, really quickly. Have seen a decline in income growth, while the upper quartile has seen a disproportionate increase in growth. The other thing which looks at the wealth differentials, because we often talk only about income and consumption. The latest data on wealth is just sort of coming out just now. There's very clear, over the 91-2002 period, because this is All India Debt and Investment Survey data for those that are interested, there's an increasing concentration of wealth in urban areas with the rich, and this is something which actually speaks to to a question which is not very well talked about. Urban wealth stratification and disadvantage persists. So the idea that we have, which comes from a sort of a Western Atlantic idea that cities are places where people come together and there's a melting pot, is actually not true. The data does not speak to that. The forward casts, and that's the line on the right at the top there, have much more wealth than the non-Hindus, and they have much more wealth than the SCs, the OBCs, and the SCs. So in a sense, that progression that we've seen in rural India, the basis of which a lot of our development programs and the whole question of social transformation is dealt with, seems still to be reproducing. The other thing is that urban poverty is concentrated more in smaller settlements, smaller size settlements and larger ones. So the white that you see there, the larger towns, the metropolitan centers, the places where we live in, at least those are many of us who are in the room. And the blue thing there is the proportion of people in small towns. That's less in this definition, less than 50,000 people. So when we're talking about urban poverty, the challenge is not to go to the JNURM 65 plus, but to go to, in the new definition, to go to the other 6,000. And I think that is the missing middle, which is the fundamental gap that we have in terms of current policy at this point of time. Quick summary: absolute poverty has reduced, the number of urban poor has increased, urban poverty has deepened and is more widely distributed across states, there's regional divergence, the consumption inequality has increased, the wealth inequality has also increased. Now, the social inclusion and stratification of occupation is still strong. However, if you look at the resource allocations for the 11th plan, this is in thousands of crores. Look at rural development on the left, 281,000 crores, and look at urban development on the right, 23,000 crores. There's a factor of 10, and that's what I was talking about. The failure really is on our part, people sitting in this room, to be able to size up the opportunity and to try and make the case, because it's very clear just now that rural poverty or changes in rural poverty and inequality are related to cities. And the future, in some senses, needs to be linked to how these two systems and the continuity between them through the small, the medium, and the large towns. We have to look at this as a continuum to be able to deal with this question. If you look at the central sector policy, as you look at the 12th plan approach paper, I guess the important thing is the importance of the urban transition has been recognized, but still, urban development will receive residual public investment. So what are the opportunities? And I'll just close here, Rakesh. The first thing is a recognition of the urban contribution to aggregate growth and rural poverty reduction. And this is where we require more evidence and clarity of process. Also, urban centers as catalysts for manufacturing sector growth. This is off the agenda at the moment. It's not, it doesn't appear in the policy dialogue, or it's fractured between different parts of our system. The linkage between land and labor market development and urban growth development and poverty reduction. I think, and a lot of this comes from cases that are emerging in different parts of the country. Particular states and cities have actually done this quite well. Halting maldevelopment, the eviction of large numbers of people is obviously the first thing that you need to do. Dealing with sustainable livelihoods, and of course, another thing that's pretty obvious, we've been pretty aggressive on rural poverty targets. Are we willing to put our money where our mouth is on in terms of urban poverty targets? Because we're seeing they're rising, absolutely. The role of small and medium towns is central to this process. Something that's we're not willing to even talk about is migration as a poverty reduction strategy. Does it work? Does it work for South Asia? Does it work for India? Is it actually happening if we look at non-permanent migrations? And of course, regional imbalance correction. Politically incorrect to talk about it at the current point of time. We've talked about capacity building linkages. And of course, at the end of this, you have to start building a social safety net.